Since its release in 2004 for the PlayStation 2, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater has been loved by fans. Many would call it the best game in the Metal Gear franchise. And 21 years later, it's gotten a bit of a facelift. Okay, maybe saying a bit was an understatement. Hey, I finally got around to an MGS video on this channel. Not the one everyone wanted, but baby steps, right? The remake train shows no signs of stopping, and here we are graced with yet another classic, rebuilt for a new generation of players. Metal Gear Solid Delta takes the stealth action of Snake Eater we all know and love, gives it a major graphical overhaul, updates the controls in an attempt to modernize them, and slaps a $70 price tag on it. Now I should mention two things right off the bat, neither of which should be a surprise to longtime viewers. I'm a fan of the original game. I'll lose points with some of you by saying that it's not my favorite of the series, but I still very much like it, and I'm also pretty tired of this remake trend. I simply do not see a reason to take already great games that people have been experiencing for decades and develop them all over again. Other than, the money that comes with name recognition. But just because I might find a remake superfluous doesn't mean it's not worth taking a look at. So, after consuming many a serpent and surpassing even the boss, here are my thoughts on Metal Gear Solid Delta. Unlike your Resident Evils or Final Fantasy VIIs, Delta is a faithful recreation of the game it's based on, essentially acting as a shot-for-shot remake. The story is unchanged, told via cutscenes that have the same exact direction, pacing, and dialogue. In fact, the voice acting and music are pulled straight from the original Snake Eater, because both of these elements are timeless and changing them would be blasphemy. Don't fix what ain't broken. Though I have to say that watching cutscenes I've seen dozens of times, but now with high-fidelity models and perfect lip-sync, was very strange to me. It was like an uncanny valley effect that took a while to get over. And this is a nitpick, but in order to address control or menu differences in this remake, there are now a couple lines during radio calls that are stitched together from other dialogue, and they sound horrible.
In the survival viewer, choose Weapon from the backpack. Your available weapons will be displayed in a list on the screen.
These are rare, and almost fully relegated to optional radio calls, but still, oof. Environments are laid out exactly how you remember them, still divided into small sections separated by brief loads. Item and weapon pickups are where they've always been, and all the same tricks and strategies you may have used against guards or used to cheese boss fights still work now. They even brought back content that was in the original PS2 release, but got removed from later ports. The Guy Savage Easter egg is back, and the Ape Escape minigame Snake vs. Monkey makes its glorious return. Unless you're playing on Xbox. Instead, you get Snake vs. Bomberman. I haven't played that, but it seems okay. And all of this familiar content now looks much prettier from a technical standpoint. The detail here is impressive all around, from the character models to blood effects and explosions, all the way down to how blades of grass look. Seeing mud and leaves stick to Snake as he crawls along the forest floor is genuinely cool to see. Unreal Engine 5 is clearly putting in some serious work. In regards to performance, I have seen complaints about Delta, especially when it comes to consoles, but on my PC, it ran pretty well overall. Running on an SSD with an AMD Ryzen 7700, NVIDIA RTX 4070 Ti, and 32 gigs of RAM, it never crashed on me and remained stable. I did notice some frame drops when I turned my camera towards some of the denser, busier areas, and I had my share of micro stutters, but none of this affected my play. Of course, that's just on my setup. I can't guarantee that will be your experience, so see what others with similar hardware to yours are saying, and maybe wait for a few patches if you want extra assurance. One last thing to mention about looks. Undeniably, Delta is a very pretty game, anyone can see that, but I also think it's somewhat over-polished. Like, it's very bright and clean, but that takes away some of the grime that Snake Eater once had. This is a personal preference thing, but I've noticed that many games that prioritize graphics will tend to go for this cleaner appearance because it looks good in screenshots and trailers, but that comes at the expense of a unique texture, for lack of a better word. However, Delta does have a solution for this. I highly recommend turning on the Legacy filter located in the options. I didn't have it on for my initial playthrough, but I wish I had, because I think it improves the aesthetics. The colors are desaturated a bit, greens and browns pop more, and it adds back that texture that I feel was missing. You don't have to take my advice. If you prefer the game's new look, that's fine, but give it a go and see how it feels, because I'm never turning it off. Aside from that graphical boost, the other big change to Metal Gear Solid 3's core are the controls, which have been overhauled to make gameplay feel more current. I think that even though some parts of the original were, and always have been, a bit clunky, it still plays perfectly fine, but I do understand taking this opportunity to make some quality of life adjustments. When starting a new game, you're asked to choose between two control styles, New and Legacy, with each having their own quirks and locked perspective. New is in third person, while Legacy does a top-down view. You can't freely swap between these different cameras, not without also committing to switching to the other control scheme, and I don't see why this restriction exists. Subsistence, a re-release of Snake Eater that came out in 2005, basically a director's cut version, introduced a third-person camera and let you switch between it and the top-down view with a button press. That's what everyone's been playing the last 2 decades, and I don't see any good excuse to remove it. That aside, I think new style is what most people will pick, and it's what I primarily used, but 20 years of muscle memory resulted in my hands twisting in knots for much longer than I care to admit. This is a me problem, but I was going into the wrong menus or unintentionally performing actions embarrassingly often, usually to Snake's detriment. Inputs have been shuffled around, with button functions appealing to more modern sensibilities. A is interact, B is crouch, left trigger aims while right trigger shoots, etc., and menus for inventory and the radio have been relocated to the D-pad. Aiming uses an over-the-shoulder camera, which should be familiar to anyone who's played MGS5, and while prone, you can aim in all directions, with Snake rolling around to align himself properly. You can now walk around in first person instead of being locked in place, and Snake learned how to crouch walk, acting as a nice middle ground trade-off between visibility and speed. In case any Snake Eater veterans are wondering, yes, these changes do reduce the game's overall challenge, but let's face it, Snake Eater on normal difficulty wasn't exactly hard to begin with. But to try and compensate for these newer features, guards do have noticeably increased awareness. I found myself getting spotted from distances I'm not used to. And the tranquilizer gun that could be famously abused in the original has been nerfed with severe bullet drop and a significant accuracy penalty when at range. The camouflage food and cure mechanics more or less work the same, having you go into the survival viewer on a regular basis to manage. When injured, a small pop-up will now inform you of your need for medical aid, and also give you a one-button shortcut straight to the cure screen. The one big convenience upgrade to these systems is the introduction of camo quick swapping. One of Snake Eater's more notable flaws has always been the need to constantly stop and swap outfits in order to maximize your stealth efficiency, having to go in and out of the camo menu over and over again. Now, while still in-game, you can access a list of your most recent uniform and face paint combinations, letting you change to something different on the fly with a brief transition. Again, it's not a full list, so you still need to access the usual menu semi-regularly, but it's certainly an improvement and an appreciated change. However, I'm not a fan of every change they made. First, we've got the camera, which I think is too zoomed in. The FOV when standing isn't that bad, but the viewpoint only zooms in further when crouching, and even more when prone. This didn't happen in the original. The camera's distance to you didn't change. It's needlessly claustrophobic and reduces the player's situational awareness for no good reason. There's also a greater weightiness and detail to animations that makes some actions noticeably slower. The biggest thing affected is the picking up and dragging of bodies. Moving someone into a hidey hole or looting enemies after an encounter feels much more sluggish, especially when Snake has to turn over and adjust someone to get them in the right position first. It's an example of prioritizing looking good over feeling good. On the subject of not feeling good, the cover system sucks. MGS Delta opts for one of those automatic cover systems that guesses if you're trying to stick to something like a crate, corner wall, or tree. It limits player control and only leads to annoying situations. You're kind of praying the system works when you want it to, and it has never been entirely consistent in any game. I routinely got glued to surfaces I had no intention of hiding behind, and had the opposite problem where the game just decided that I didn't want to take cover. And one final complaint that some people will find silly: stalking. In Snake Eater, stalking is a separate movement speed, essentially tiptoeing. You move way slower, but you also don't make any noise, a vital mechanic for getting the drop on people. That's all fine and dandy, it works just as well now as it always did. The issue I have with stalking is this dumb, unnecessary, distracting effect that blackens the screen every time you turn it on. Any tap of the stalk button gives you instant cataracts. Did we really need a "you are now sneaking" signal to muddy the image every time we want to creep around? I know that I'm sneaking. I can see Snake being sneaky. I don't need nor want this feedback. I wouldn't bitch about this if you could just turn it off like you can so many other HUD elements, but for some reason, this one is mandatory. Maybe there's a mod floating around that disables it, and if you find one, use it. But what about the legacy controls? To be honest, I didn't test them that extensively. I knocked the difficulty down to easy and played up to the meeting with Granin just to get a feel for them, and my conclusion is that they're fine, but more legacy-ish. An approximation rather than an accurate implementation. You're stuck using the overhead camera, a decision I still don't understand, and most of those fancy upgrades I talked about before are reversed. You can no longer aim over the shoulder, which eliminates aiming in all directions while prone. You also can't move while in first person anymore, although you are once again able to stick to any flat surface just by pressing against it, something they really should allow you to do with the new controls too. Oh, and those tranquilizer gun nerfs are gone, allowing you to snipe guards with sleepy time darts all day long. Where I think these legacy controls really falter, since the name implies they'll offer a familiar experience for purists, is that they don't actually change most of the inputs back to what they were. Yeah, some of the face buttons are what they used to be. A is crouch, B is CQC, and Y is interact, but that's about it. It becomes a weird mishmash of the old and new layouts. Now, Delta does give you the ability to customize your controls, so you may think that if someone really wants that old-school experience, one can simply adjust things themselves, but that's not entirely true. Let's say that you want the weapon and item inventories on the triggers like they used to be. Well, for some reason, those inputs are locked to the D-pad. You can change their orientation, but they're restricted from being moved anywhere else. And in classic Snake Eater, raising your gun and firing it were the same button, but you can't set dual inputs, so both actions must be separated. To be clear, I think this game is designed for and at its best when playing with new style controls, if for no other reason than the third-person camera is superior. But if you're going to have this entire control scheme that's meant to replicate how things were, then you should really go all the way with it instead of offering a half measure. I can't deny that Metal Gear Solid Delta is a good remake, and there are definitely some things it improves on from the 2004 original, but I'm personally torn on recommending it at full price. On one hand, it's Snake Eater again. Same quality story, same quality characters, same quality gameplay with some noteworthy improvements, and it's certainly beautiful to look at. On the other hand, it's Snake Eater, again, which still holds up all on its own and can be purchased right now on current platforms for a fraction of the price. This remake does do some things better, but it already had a strong blueprint to copy its homework from, and I don't think the changes are enough to make it a replacement for the original. If it were $40 or $50, I think it would be an easy sell as an upgraded version of an already great game, but I'm hesitant to say $70 is justified when you can spend $20 and see just about all the same content. I guess if you're the type of person who looks at PS2 graphics and thinks, ew, gross, old stuff, where's the HDR and real-time reflections? Well, first off, I pity you, but yeah, sure, in that case, if Delta finally gets you to play this beloved classic, go for it. But for the rest of you, try to grab it when it's discounted. That's just my opinion though, so share your thoughts on Metal Gear Solid Delta in the comments, rate the video whether you liked or disliked it, smash the hype button if that's a thing I have to say now, and please have a wonderful rest of your day.